So just finished turn number 13 here, and things continue to heat up across the globe. A couple of things that corrections that I have to talk about. The first thing was a couple turns ago I had placed a German fortification down in West Germany. So in the neutral forces setup section, for January 1940, additional forces get put on the board depending on if the country hasn't been aligned or not. And for some reason, I mean, I should have picked up on it. It was under the neutral country section. But for some reason, I read it wrong. There was a comma after for Switzerland when it says you put one mountain infantry on, comma, and on the next line, fortification on the German border. And I just had a brain freeze there and read that wrong and thought it meant Germany got to put a fortification down. I was thinking that, you know, I mean, the Germans obviously built the Siegfried Line or the West Wall in World War II. So I thought maybe, you know, that kind of went hand in hand with Germany putting down a fortification. But after someone had kind of made a comment about that, I went back and looked and said, I read that wrong. So Germany wasn't supposed to get a fortification, so I took that off the board. No harm, because it didn't come into play at all. There was no combat, no activity in West Germany where I had put the fortification down. So that was one thing. Another thing someone had mentioned in the comments was, why wasn't I buying mechanized infantry as opposed to motorized infantry? And again, that was another brain freeze on my part. So I, for some reason, was thinking that, you know, obviously you start out with motorized infantry in the game. And motorized and mechanized infantry cost the same. They each cost $4. The mechanized infantry attack at a higher die roll, I believe 1 higher. So clearly, you're way better off purchasing mechs. But again, for some reason, I had a brain freeze and was thinking that the technology of advanced mechanized meant that the motorized, at that point, once you get the advanced mechanized tech, that allows you to purchase mechanized infantry as opposed to motorized. So for some reason, I don't know why I was getting that confused in my head. Probably from just playing a solo game. Like I said, you miss things here and there, and you don't have, you know, a human opponent here to, you know, point things out to you until after the fact. So from this point forward, and Germany is allowed to purchase mechs prior to other nations. I believe they can purchase them in July of 38. So like 2 years, I believe, prior to other nations. So for now, I'm just leaving everything on the board as it is. It wasn't disadvantageous to any one country. Everybody, you know, I was having everybody purchase just the motorized infantry because no one actually has gotten advanced mechanized technology right now. So going forward, again, correcting that brain freeze, and we can go ahead and purchase mechanized infantry for everybody, because now we're far enough into the war that every country has access to mechanized infantry. So starting out with Germany, they actually bought a bunch of subs and fighters this turn. So for the second turn in a row, they spent almost all of their money on their Navy and Air Force, neglecting to buy new units for the Eastern Front for now. So as you can see, the new subs that they purchased along with the ones that they already had down, that's a stack of about 15 subs right there now. So Germany's back in a big way with a U-boat fleet. They can move 3 spaces this next turn, so they're about to come out into the Atlantic this turn and pose all kinds of problems to the Western Allies. Again, they also bought a bunch of fighters. They put them down here in Bavaria, also flew some fighters down there. So that's a stack of about 7 or 8 fighters now, just outside of Italian territory. So Germany plans on bringing that fighter force down into the Mediterranean to help back up their Italian allies. On the Eastern Front, not a ton of movement. Germany took a couple of territories, and then Russia ended up taking actually 2 of them back again. So it's kind of a back and forth. Germany, again, doesn't want to venture too far forward until they can kind of group everything together. They don't want to expose their large stack of armor to the Russian counterattack from Arel Kursk. So Germany just kind of inching their way forward. They still have a ton of units here on the central section of the Eastern Front. And again, they're kind of consolidated together now. So I can see Germany pushing together with all of this stuff here, which is 2 different stacks of about 20 medium armor, about 10 motorized infantry, and about 5 towed artillery. So I can see them pushing forward here, and we might have a major battle when the Russians come around to their portion of the turn. Up north, the Germans moved up took another one of the Baltic states. So that's 5 medium armor and 10 self-propelled artillery closing in on Leningrad. So we'll see how that works out for Germany. And they've got a tiny air force sitting in Romania. So I can see Germany, now that they've built up a significant U-boat fleet, I can see them now turning back towards spending most of their money on the Eastern Front. The Russians responded by taking a couple of territories back, dropping 5 more men in Leningrad, 5 more men in Arel Kursk, and they actually bought 4 tactical bombers that they put in Moscow. They also pulled back a little bit from Finland. They're trying to get these units here back to Leningrad before the Germans can attack. So a little bit of a stalemate right now, although I think Germany still has the advantage, and they again are collecting about double the amount of money that the Russians are. So not sure if Germany decides to devote all their economic resources to the Eastern Front again. I'm not sure, without help from the Allies, if Russia can hold on indefinitely at least. As far as the Western Allies go, so that's what I love about this game. Just a little brief interruption. So I got into these games, the grandfather of them all, the original Milton Bradley Axis and Allies from '84. So I played that for the first time, I think in '85. I was 14. I was over at a buddy's house, and him and his dad played. Me and my buddy split up the Allies, and his dad took on the Axis. And I was hooked after the first game. And what I really liked about it is that, instead of a game, being over in 30 or say 60 minutes, classic board games from back in the day, this was a game that took, hours, if not, depending, you might even take 2 days to finish. And that was the case with us. We played for like about 4 hours one night and then had to finish up the next morning. And I thought that was really cool that, I love long, drawn-out games where a single turn isn't going to necessarily determine the outcome. There's ebb and flow back and forth. And this game here is probably like the ultimate at doing that. So we're 13 turns in. There's definitely no clear-cut side that has the advantage. And the ebb and flow is, for several turns, Germany had no navy in the water at all. So the Allies were kind of free to do what they want. They didn't have to worry about protecting the transports all that much because Germany didn't have any naval units on the board. So they could kind of maneuver around and, spend their money, other ways. Well, now that the Germans have this stack of 15 subs ready to come out in the Atlantic, now both Britain and the United States have to think about what they're going to do to counter that, because those 15 German subs are more than a match for the current navies of both the United States and Britain in the Atlantic. So, for instance, the British came out. They had to clear out their transports with the 4 men that were in London. They only had a total of 6 destroyers. There's no way that was going to stand up to 15 subs. So now they've moved out here. So they're basically one space ahead of what the Germans can do. So the British are going to be able to make it to the Med before those subs can reach them. And then the United States had been spending most of their money building ships for the Pacific, their clash with the Japanese. But again, with all those German subs, the U.S. didn't have enough ships in the Atlantic to counter that, so they had to drop a light cruiser and 5 destroyers this turn. And then the fleet that they had sitting off of the east coast of the United States has now started to make its way over to Africa. And that's right here. 3 destroyers, a couple of light cruisers, a loaded fleet carrier, and then 6 transports with 6 men, 3 tanks, and 3 artillery. But again, the problem is not only did the U.S. have to spend money on building up another fleet here in the Atlantic, but now again, this fleet here is ahead of the German subs, so they're going to definitely be able to land in North Africa before the subs can reach them. But on their return journey, those German subs will be able to intercept them before they can get back to the U.S. So now these 6 transports are going to be extremely vulnerable because 3 destroyers, 2 light cruisers, and a fleet carrier probably is not going to be able to stand up to 15 subs. So again, the U.S. is having to spend money, maybe not necessarily where they wanted to right now. And that's part of the whole ebb and flow where, depending on what, one side does, it's going to definitely cause a reaction from the other side. And maybe that other side didn't want to have to do that, but the Germans have kind of forced their hand there. So not sure Germany's going to keep spending money because that stack of 15 subs is enough to keep the Allies occupied for a while. Maybe give Italy some more breathing space. The British also bought 2 tactical bombers they put in South Africa. They continue to move up. They don't want to move up too far. They're trying to get everything together before they make a final push into Egypt because the Italians do have a significant air force in North Africa. So they don't want to send, half of this force too far up. The other half can't reach it, and then the Italians can kind of pick it off one at a time. So that's why the British force here in Central Africa is kind of moving their way up slowly. The British still have this fleet in the Med. The Italians, they bought 1 medium armor and 1 infantry, and then they saved the rest of their money. So I think they're going to have about $37 or so to spend next turn. And the 3 fighters they had bought last turn flew from North Italy down into Africa. So now in Cyrenaica, the Italians have about 9 fighters, 4 tacticals, 3 medium bombers, 3 infantry, and a motorized infantry. So Italy's looking pretty good. Now, again, both the British and the U.S. are going to be able to reach Africa this next turn, but they're only going to be able to reach over here in West Africa. They're not going to be able to get close to Tripolitania or Cyrenaica this turn. And then again, this might be the only shot the British and the Americans have for a while to drop units off because of those 15 German subs that are going to be coming out. So that's how Europe looks. As far as the Pacific, we're gearing up for a major showdown between the Japanese and the American Navy. So America is now fully in the conflict, and Japan and the U.S. are at war. So Japan finished off 3 light carriers, and they were able to put those on the board because once they're at war with the United States, that's part of their setup. So they got those 3 carriers on the board. They also built a couple of subs, and they also put down some new ships. So they moved 2 more heavy Yamato-class battleships up a spot and then put 2 light cruisers and a light carrier on the board. And then Japan pulled back from the Caroline Islands with this fleet over here, took the Philippines without losing anything. So that took a couple of bucks off the U.S. Plus now this fleet is positioned where they can maybe go back at the Far East Command. With this fleet pulled out of the way for a while, the Far East Command was thinking maybe they can start building some transports and moving some stuff from Calcutta into the Money Islands and take them back from Japan. But now this fleet down here is more than a match for the Far East Command. That's 3 heavy cruisers, a battle cruiser, 5 destroyers, and a light carrier. So Japan's going to be able to hold on to these money islands, at least warding off any threat from Anzac or the Far East Command. All of their Navy, now these 3 light carriers are in a different sea zone than this huge fleet, but I just don't have enough room in this sea zone. So all of these ships are actually in sea zone 56. So altogether, that's a massive Japanese fleet of 3 Yamato-class heavy battleships, 3 light carriers, 2 fleet carriers, 2 regular battleships, 3 subs, 2 destroyers, and 2 light cruisers. So a massive Japanese force there. They also pulled back a little bit into North China, dropped a man and a militia, moved over on a transport. So they moved some stuff into Rihe because the communist Chinese are starting to make some noise, trying to push the Japanese out. That was about it for Japan. The Far East Command took British Malaya back. So they got that. So Singapore is back under the Union Jack banner. They also put 2 medium armor down in Calcutta. So Japan has no presence whatsoever, at least on land in Southeast Asia. So Far East Command isn't in any danger right now, but they're only collecting $14 a turn. So it's not like I don't think really at this point they're going to be much of a factor. Anzac, no danger of Japan coming down. They just save their money. Now they could take this transport, come out and start taking back some of these islands here. But, okay, they'd be able to land here, take this back, New Guinea for $1. But Japan's right in position to destroy the transport next turn. So it'd be really kind of waste. So you're throwing away a man and a transport to get $1 back. So Anzac just continues to sit in Sydney, you know. I'm hoping Japan doesn't turn their attention their way. As far as the U.S., so one other thing that I have to mention real quick is on the last turn, I had dispersed the U.S. fleet into a couple of sea zones here, and then that was it. Everything else was vacant. All these sea zones were vacant all the way up to Japan, because I was thinking that they were 5 spaces away from Japan. And even with the port, that's only 4 spaces that this fleet could have moved. So they were out of range. But I then went back and was looking over the Japanese sneak attack. And actually, Japanese ships get to move 1 extra space. So that's 5 spaces. They would have been able to reach either one of these fleets. And let's say they would have taken out the fleet here in Sea Zone 29. Now they would have completely destroyed that with almost no casualties. And then they would have boxed in the fleet here in Sea Zone 20 and would have been able to destroy that on the next turn. So that really would have tilted the game in Japan's favor. And it was just like an oversight on my part. So I went ahead and dispersed 3 U.S. destroyers from these fleets to block off Japan, just so that, you know, Japan couldn't reach the 2 main U.S. fleets up here. So Japan, that's why Japan didn't go after any of the fleets over here along the west coast of the United States. The U.S. then moved those 2 fleets plus the fleet that was over off of the Panama Canal all over here to Hawaii. So now that U.S. fleet is 2 fleet carriers, a light carrier, 2 battleships, a sub, 6 heavy cruisers, 5 light cruisers, and 3 destroyers. So a pretty sizable U.S. fleet, plus they've got a major port there that they can get the extra movement off of. They also finished off a bunch of ships, so they've got 3 more battleships and 3 light cruisers in San Francisco. And then 2 battleships that were part of the fleet off of Panama. They only can move 2 spaces, so that's why they're behind the fleet that's in Hawaii. So that was everything that the U.S. did. So I can see a major naval engagement coming up here pretty shortly. Now, the Japanese can, on their turn, again, most of these naval units if not all of them, can move 4 spaces because of being in a major port. So 1, 2, 3, 4. They can engage that U.S. fleet in Hawaii this turn if they so desire. But that's a pretty sizable U.S. fleet. Japan probably would win it, especially with the 3 heavy battleships taking 3 hits to destroy. But you might not have much left, and then the U.S. Navy that's off of San Francisco here can then counterattack on the U.S. portion of the turn and probably wipe out that Japanese fleet. So I'm not sure Japan is going to venture out to Hawaii. We'll see. As far as China goes, Communist China has won the Civil War. They're in complete control of China, minus 1 warlord. They tried the influence role and didn't get it, surprisingly. But now that they have a land territory bordering the Soviet Union, they have access to artillery. So they went and bought some artillery this turn and just slowly starting to move their infantry up. So they're going to start taking back some of these territories for Japan. Depending on how things go in the Pacific in terms of naval combat, Japan might put some more money into China, or they might just try to defend their original Japanese territories, and that might be about it. So that's where things stand after turn 13. We'll let you know how turn 14 goes in a little bit.